Yeah, good evening, good morning, good afternoon to our IFAD India webinar. May I quickly introduce myself? My name is Katharina Schlegel and I'm based in Munich, and I'm heading the IFAD shows worldwide because IFAD covers a worldwide series of exhibitions in China, in Turkey, in South Africa, in Munich, and also two of us in India. I'm very proud to open another webinar of IFAD India's webinar series. We have already covered a wide range of topics, whether it be related to waste or to water issues. Today we are talking about the reuse of wastewater in the post-COVID-19 area, a topic, in my opinion, which could not be more important, because all over the world currently discussions and research is going on whether wastewater might be potentially contaminated with COVID, and in particular, of course, how it could be protected of such contamination. I'm therefore in particular very happy to welcome today a very distinguished panel of speakers, of experts who will sort of guide us today through very interesting topics and discussions. Before we show a quick video as a kind of introduction in today's webinar, I also would like to thank our partners, for example, the EBTC, the GIZ, the EU delegation, and of course also the Indo-European Watership Partnership. But before we start, let's show us a quick video and then we can go on.
IFAD has become a very important springboard for bringing about a change.
IFAD India will give a common platform to thought leaders from across the globe to address such issues and, more importantly, to find solutions.
So this is one of the world's leading environmental technology platforms. And in terms of the sustainable development goals, clean water, sanitation, and climate action. So IFAD brings together the technology providers and can help many of our cities to adopt the latest technologies, which will be both climate friendly and provide services like water and sanitation efficiently.
We need all the sources.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, before we start, I have the pleasure to introduce our distinguished guests and panelists. Let me start with Ms. Henrietta Fergemann. She is the first counselor at the delegation of the European Union to India, and she is in particular taking care of environment, mobility, urbanization, smart cities, and energy and climate change. Welcome and thank you very much for being part today, and in particular for being our keynote speaker. Then I also have the pleasure to welcome Mr. Jeremy Bird. He is a water resources advisor and works for the Indo-European Water Partnership. Jeremy will lead us through today's discussion and will sort of also lead the panel discussion today. Then I also have the pleasure to welcome Mr. Rajiv Ranjan Mishra. Mr. Mishra, he's a Director General at the National Mission for the Clean Ganga. I think one of the most interesting and most thrilling projects currently going on in India. Welcome and thank you very much for joining us today. Then our next panelist speaker will be Mr. K.P. Bakshi. Mr. Bakshi is a former additional Chief Secretary of Maharashtra and a former chairman of the Maharashtra Water Resources Regulatory Authority, which I'm quite sure he will also give us very valuable insights today. Thank you and welcome. Then I would like to welcome Ms. Birgit Vogel. She is a project manager and being responsible for the implementation support to the EU-India Water Partnership, which is also, I think, very interesting and very important that we have a global perspective and a joint look at these topics, not only from a local perspective, but from a more European or international perspective. Birgit, welcome and thank you for joining us today. Then I would like to say hello to Mr. Yatin Tayala. Yatin, he is a business leader for the Suez Water and Technologies, and he is responsible for the South Asia region. Welcome and also thank you for joining us today. And last but not least, I would like to introduce Mr. Ranjit Chopra. He's the global head for the for business development in the VA Tech Wabak Ltd. Also very welcome and thank you for joining us today. And now I would like to hand over to Jeremy, who will lead us through today's discussion. Jeremy, thanks a lot for doing this today. And we are now really looking forward to a good panel discussion. But before we enter the panel discussion, Henrietta, the floor is yours now. Henrietta, we cannot hear you. Could you maybe just, yeah, that's fine.
Sorry, I just needed to unmute myself, sorry.
Okay, no. Okay, go on.
So, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me to open this webinar today. I'm really grateful to our partners, you from IFAD, from GIZ, EBTC, the Government of India, European and Indian business representatives, and everyone who is being part of today's session, as we heard on the reuse of water in the post-COVID era. As you may know, this session was supposed to have taken place in Munich in May, but unfortunately for reasons obvious to everybody, it was not possible for us to travel with the Indian delegation that we had planned. So I'm really very happy that we have managed to organize this session instead. Water reuse is a central part of the EU's water policy, as I think many of you are aware, and also very central to the EU's new Green Deal, which came out very recently, which focuses on circularity in all sectors of the society. Water reuse is circularity in practice, I would say. Water reuse is also of particular relevance for a country like India, that is severely water stressed in many parts of the country and many times over the year. And now more than ever needs access to water for many purposes in society, and including cleanliness, which is a big part of this post-COVID scenario, of course. So I would just like to say a few words on the context and the India-EU water partnership. For Europe and India, water is at the center of our cooperation agenda. Water has been highlighted as a priority area for cooperation in the two most recent summits between the EU and India, and in the EU strategy on India. It's clearly spelled out both the necessity to address water challenges and the opportunities for the EU and India to collaborate on addressing them. Saving water, water conservation, rainwater harvesting, water reuse is very high on the strategic agenda, as I mentioned, both for the EU and for India, in order to secure the future for citizens and for our economies. And we already have a very good tool in place for this cooperation, as you have heard, the India-EU Water Partnership. The Memorandum of Understanding that formalized the India-EU Water Partnership was signed by the former Indian Minister for Water Resources, Umar Bharti, and the European Commissioner for Environment, Mr. Vella, in October 2016. The Water Partnership is a multi-stakeholder process where the EU and the Indian government, European member states and Indian states, as well as businesses, research institutions, and many others work together to address the water-related challenges. For the EU, the partnership allows us to bring together all our member states who each have their own key strengths, competencies, and technologies. And the way that these can be combined into a European approach is we feel really something special and something that we are very proud of and really very happy to share with the Indian stakeholders through the India-EU Water Partnership. We have jointly identified 9 priority areas of the India-EU Water Partnership, and we are working closely with officials from the Ministry of Jal Shakti and other water authorities, as well as other national and state level actors to implement them. Let me just take this opportunity also to thank all our partners from the government and every part of the Indian water sector and elsewhere for the good cooperation that we have had. I think this water partnership is really a flagship for us. It's the first of these kind of EU-India partnerships that we have developed, and I'm so happy and proud with the way that it has progressed to date and continues to progress. Let me give you a few results of the cooperation that we have already achieved so far. An official Tapi River Basin Committee was formed in order to develop a Tapi River Basin management plan involving the national level and the 3 states that share the basin. Those of you who are from the water sector will understand the significance of that, because you know, and we know very well in the EU, that water can only be managed at a river basin level. So the prerequisite for managing water in any way is to really bring the states together, and this happened for the first time as part of the India-EU Water Partnership, and I'm really happy about that. We've also jointly developed a first version of an environmental flow guidance that aims to ensure sufficient water in Indian rivers. We've taken steps toward a water information system Ganga. We've agreed on an approach for assessing water use efficiency. We've carried out an assessment of the opportunities for reuse and treated wastewater, which we are going to hear much more about in a little moment. And we are supporting the development of a national policy. In addition to this, a large number of events and workshops have been held, and we are right now in the process of moving from the first phase of the India-EU Water Partnership, where we have done all this work, into the next phase 2, where we will continue to implement these and really bring them much more to completion, to something concrete. So we will aim to bring on board European businesses, all kind of European actors, bring them together with Indian businesses, Indian actors, and really try to jointly develop and form solutions that can be implemented in practice. So this was just a few words to set the context, and I'm sorry if I've taken too much time, but really very warm welcome from my side, and thank you to everybody who has made this possible, and thank you for all the good work. Thank you.
Right, well, thank you, Henriette. And so I'm Jeremy Bird, and welcome to everybody. Good day. I'm part of a team that's working with the Government of India to develop a national policy on treated wastewater reuse and support that process. And I'd like to first of all thank both the organizers of this event for giving us the opportunity for this platform to get some feedback on some of the critical issues that need to be addressed in that policy formulation process. But also I'd like to thank those that are supporting the process, like the India-EU Water Partnership we just heard about, and GIZ through their support program to the Ganga Rejuvenation Project, and of course our main counterparts, the NMCG. Other members of the team are also here. They're Krishna Rao and Girija Bharat, and they made very important contributions. So this is very much early stages of the process, and I think today we hope to have quite a rich discussion and explore some of the links between policy, business, and of course now this current issue around COVID-19. So let's start. If I could have the next slide, please. If we could start sharing the presentation. Thanks, Manali. So I think we've already heard there's been, we know the situation in India in terms of, if you go on to the next slide, Manali, please. We know the situation here in terms of the level of water stress. We know the increasing demand. I mean, if you look there, you'll see that already more than 50% of groundwater is stressed in the country. We know the concerns about the amount of water, the wastewater, which is released into the environment, untreated, more than 60%. We just go back one, Manali, please, to the previous slide. Thanks. And then the consequences that that has also on disease and the environment. And so that the rationale, I think, for wastewater treatment, I think ethically is very well known. But beyond that, we have just what Henrietta talked about, which is the circular economy. And it actually makes business sense to invest in treated wastewater reuse, and the opportunity to get a revenue stream from reuse to finance wastewater treatment and improvements to the whole system in an integrated way, I think is very natural. And it's very pleasing today that we have a couple of members from business who will be able to, I think, make that case as well. So if you move on to the next slide, we see that, next slide, please. Perceptions are changing. Already about 10 states in the country have either approved or draft water policies. We see that there are a series of business models being developed. This is just one. I don't have time to go into them in detail, but there are many different business models for different circumstances to make best use of the situation and to bring in the different players, government, utilities, private sector, and ultimate users. And we see a whole series of complementary processes. We see revisions to national policies like the new water policy, which is being developed, and the new urban sanitation policy, which is being drafted. We have a recent policy on fecal sludge and septic management, which also fills in one piece of this jigsaw. We have initiatives around zero liquid discharge and how to make that more attractive to industry and more operational. And there are a series of programs, national programs, which help to finance some of these, the uptake of these initiatives. Next slide, please. Another driver behind the reason that industry would be interested in using treated wastewater is the cost of fresh water is rising. This is just one graph from a number of cities in India, and you can see this would also be an incentive for companies to look more seriously at the use of wastewater. So there's different factors here. You have this sort of incentive side, but you also have the driver from the states who are making treated wastewater mandatory for some of the reasons I already went into. Next slide, please. Now, the India-EU Water Partnership last year published a very interesting book, which will be made available after this session through the social media, doing a comparative analysis of policies for treated wastewater reuse in the EU, in a couple of states, Gujarat and Haryana in India, and in a couple of other countries, including Singapore. And this is one figure from that report, which shows how extensive treated wastewater reuse is in Europe, but also have diversities. In the northern part of Europe, you see it's mainly for industrial use. As you move further south in Europe, it's actually more for agricultural use because of the water scarcity for agriculture in those areas. And I think we'll see a very similar diversity across the states of India as well, but each state having perhaps different perspectives on why treated wastewater is going to be so an important part of integrated urban water management in the future. Next slide, please. Now, from the same report, we see this schematic diagram with lots of arrows trying to characterize how the system works. And you see the light blue arrows, which show the treated water from a water supply works going to different users, to industry, to municipalities, to agriculture, although probably agriculture gets more of its water direct from raw water sources here in India. Then you see the brown arrows, which are showing the waste from those users back into the system. Here it's showing it back to wastewater treatment, but we also see, as I mentioned, quite a lot of waste going straight back into surface water bodies, groundwater, etc. Then the dark arrows, which show the flow of the water from the after use back to through treatment back into use, but also to the environment. And then the purple arrow, which is an interesting one, shows the resource that's possible, the other byproducts that can come from waste treatment and go back into being valuable either as energy, as fertilizers, or other industrial applications. So let's now superimpose on that the policy environment. If we move on to the next slide, we're going to show how some of the existing policies in India govern these different processes. And you'll see the national water policy there, national environment policy, FSSM policy, the regulation on zero liquid discharge, etc. But the gap is around those dark blue arrows. And that's the gap that this treated wastewater reuse policy is intending to fill, to try and regulate more how that wastewater is reused and to incentivize and to encourage its reuse. So that's the main focus of the discussions and the policy framework that we're working on. And then on the right-hand side, you see that you also see those programs I talked about, the AMRUT program, Swachh Bharat, Jal Jeevan, which are all trying in their own ways to incentivize the uptake of these circular economy types of approaches. And then you have the standards and compliance agencies, CPE, HEO, who set water quality standards, the pollution control boards, which monitor and supervise that. And of course, overlying all of that, the National Green Tribunal, which is looking at this and trying to identify where reforms are needed. If we go on to the next slide, this we're going to come back to a little bit in the panel discussion. So I won't say too much about why a national policy is important when in fact water is a state subject, but it does have a role in terms of encouraging states to take this up, in terms of providing the finance for national programs to incentivize the uptake of wastewater reuse, and to provide some confidence, for example, for those countries importing food from India, that there is this quality assurance and regulatory framework which is governing the use of wastewater in agriculture or in industry. Next slide. And this is a bit of a rush through this, but I mean, we see these are the sort of overarching goals that the policy should aim for in terms of reducing pressure on the scarce freshwater resource, reducing risks to public health and pollution, and achieving the economic benefits that adopting this type of circular economy approach can yield. Next slide. Some of the issues that we've addressed in a working paper we prepared as a precursor to developing the policy really look at the issue of mandatory use of wastewater, and this is something which has been adopted by many of the existing states. It has to be tailored, of course, to the priorities of those states, whether it's industry, agriculture, or other uses, and it has to take into account the demand and supply equations for that. And and this is something which we need to look through in a little bit more detail. Water quality standards are the responsibility of other agencies, but the policy can, I think, encourage us to look at some of those aspects which are not yet covered by water quality standards. For example, on some of the pesticides, pharmaceuticals, microplastics, etc., the emerging pollutants which are now coming into the fore in our discussions more and more. And the recognition that business does need consistency. These are very expensive investments that are being made by business and by municipalities and utilities. And we need to have a relatively stable environment with avoid just too many frequent changes in the standards. The tariff framework is important in terms of incentivizing the use of wastewater, setting the price lower than the alternative freshwater to encourage people to use it. Providing a subsidy to agricultural users to initiate that take-up of treated wastewater. Next slide. Then ultimately, business models are at the heart of this, and I think we can learn a tremendous amount from those pioneer states that have already moved ahead on this. And we're very fortunate to have a couple of representatives from the business community who've been working in this area and who can share those experiences. I'm sure they'll say they need clarity on the financing arrangements and any subsidies that are made. We need to see the regulatory framework for technology being very nimble and being able to respond to new technologies and innovations. Perhaps even think about wastewater trading certificates, which will, a little bit like climate change. You could say, well, if one industry is not in a position to actually reuse its wastewater, then it can actually then trade that off with other industries who are doing more. These are all new ideas. And then, of course, we come back to the monitoring and the compliance, which are absolutely essential for any policy like this, to give people the confidence that what is being aspired to in the policy is actually being implemented on the ground. So next slide, please. Then this is the last slide, and before we go to the panel discussion, and I think we just want to open our eyes a little bit to some of the implications of COVID-19. Certainly, this has been a wake-up call in terms of the consequences of pandemics, and I think we have to admit across the globe that many of our risk management processes have not really prepared us for this well. And I think this is a wake-up call to look at this differently and how we can be more prepared for these sorts of pandemics. We've seen massive changes in behavior at individual level and within communities and businesses and government. We've seen tremendous rush of research. I don't know how many research papers have been published on this subject in the last month or few months, and changing perspectives. We see the appreciation of essential workers, not just health workers, but also workers in the water industry. And there are some concerns. I mean, setting priorities, clearly there's a lot of attention on COVID-19. Water supply and sanitation is absolutely critical for that, but let's not forget wastewater treatment, because that wastewater, if not treated, ultimately comes back into the water cycle and is a threat to communities. There's a concern, of course, that as countries come out of a recession, they won't have enough to invest in the basic services that they would have had otherwise. And we need to be absolutely sure that we're striving towards this overall objective of universal access to water and sanitation, which is even more important in a pandemic emergency situation like we're in at the moment. So next slide, that just about wraps up my very quick introduction, and I'm sorry for rushing that through a little bit. But now I'd like to move on, and we've already had the introduction of the panelists, and I'm very pleased to be joined by a set of very esteemed panel members from government, business, and from development assistance. And I'll just outline a little bit how this panel is going to work. First of all, I'm going to ask each of the 5 panelists to just say a few words in a couple of minutes about their perspective on treated wastewater reuse, its importance, and also the implications a little bit of the current crisis. Then we'll go into a series of more targeted questions to those panelists. And then after that, we're going to open up to an open Q&A session through the chats. And so please post your chats. And given the time constraints, unfortunately, if we can't get to them now, then we will try and do so following up on this webinar through LinkedIn and other social media events. And rest assured that all the questions and insights and suggestions you make will be compiled, and we will certainly go through that in the next stage of the policy formulation. So here we go, and I'd like to first of all turn to Mr. Mishra and ask you, sir, just to, if you in a couple of minutes, just sort of give your perspectives on this subject. Thank you. So maybe we can go back. Is Mr. Mishra online? Yes, sir, please. Just a couple of minutes to give your overall perspective and impressions.
Thank you, Jeremy, for giving a really very good overview of the what is happening on the policy front. Very quickly, I would like to give you a little perspective that how National Mission for Clean Ganga became so much involved into this whole exercise. As many of you would be aware, this is a basin which is very important basin. Almost 45% of the population lives in this basin. 11 states are there. So when we looked at the river rejuvenation or the rejuvenation of this basin, we were looking at basically quality of water as well as quantity of water. So in the quantity of water, which we typically call aviralta or good flow, so various options were exercised, and then reuse of treated wastewater also was thought as one of the very important options to bring pressure upon abstraction of fresh water. I mean, that is one of the idea, apart from improving the quality of water by improving the treatment capacity. Few months back, we had a meeting of National Ganga Council chaired by Honorable Prime Minister, in which this issue came up in a very prominent way. And in fact, he was of the opinion that we must develop a very good policy framework, not only for reuse of treated wastewater, but of course he was talking about all the byproducts of an STP. We must really start looking at economically reuse of them and develop a kind of market. And you very rightly mentioned about a kind of circular economy. So on behalf of Ministry, National Mission for Clean Ganga started working with European Union, and we also have a separate project with the German collaboration on some of these issues. And as Henrietta explained in the beginning about India-EU water partnership, so this is also one of the priority area. And NMCG is taking lead in development of this policy. I am really very happy to see when we had discussion in February last February, Mr. Bakshi was there and some of you were there. We were initially discussing about two states, Gujarat and Haryana policy, and then some policies from European Union countries, and we were looking at, and now we have moved ahead and we have got more than 10 policies, 10 states coming up. What was thought that if we develop a kind of national framework, it will bring some sort of standard or some sort of model for different states. And as someone mentioned, there is a lot of diversity in EU countries. Similarly, we also have a lot of diversity among states. I mean, their approach to the river, their approach to the agriculture, their approach to water is a big sector. So primarily, we have to look at some policy directions. Technology can be another issue about what kind of water standards, quality standards, etc. are there. Again, we have a number of policies, number of standards exist. Some of you also mentioned in your presentation. And financial model, business model becomes very important. So I think in this discussion, I will share some of it, but we have representative from industry also. So maybe their experience they will like to know. And you said that perception is changing. That's a very positive thing. And we also see that. But perception is very important, how we communicate this reuse of wastewater. First of all, there could be a lot of discussion about, do we really call them waste? They are not waste, because on one hand, we call them as a resource, as a kind of additional resource or additional water. Then to what extent calling them waste is the right kind of thing? Should we call safe reuse, or should we call them by some other name? Like Singapore talks about new water. So I think that there is a whole lot of perception management also which we have to do. Coming back to some of the challenges, now we all know that agriculture can be one very important area for reuse. Agriculture could be there, urban reuse could be there, industrial use could be there, environmental reuse could also be there. To rejuvenate wetlands or lakes and ponds also we can utilize them. And there will be an issue of different kinds of standards for different kinds of reuse. So that's one of the challenge, how we really standardize and move ahead. And some of the experience I can tell you, see, the power sector, the thermal power sector, already we have a policy from the power ministry saying that within geography plays a role. When you look at reuse, the kind of policy, how many kilometers, so how we handle that could be an issue. Power ministry has come up with 50 kilometers of an STP. They are supposed to buy the water from the STP. But again, what exactly does not make it happen? I mean, we have MOUs, but very few cases actual buyback has started, buying has started. So there are certain issues. So I think the issue of distance, the charges, whether who will bear the cost. So some of these issues come. Agriculture, I can tell you, we have recently constructed new STP in Haridwar. I mean, taking entire load, 82 MLD STP has come. Now, this is very good water for agriculture. Fields are also not very far off. But again, someone has to invest for development of a carrier canal. And here in this case with the state government, someone has invested and we are doing it. Can we really look at these options? Can we really look at them and make it more business oriented? Can it be a revenue model? Maybe in industry it will be possible, but in agriculture it's a big challenge. Very quickly coming to the industry, I will share one experience of one of the STP in Mathura. There could be various business models, and maybe some of the other panelists will get into details, like either we fix the price for treated wastewater with minimum guarantee, or some sort of utility buyback we bring, or we have a model where industry purchases the secondary treated water. This is what we did in Mathura, where the Indian Oil, basically they are purchasing from us, and we are constructing a tertiary treatment plant where the major share is coming from the Indian Oil. They are constructing and they are also sharing the O&M of this plant. And we initially invested because we were trying to develop a first of its kind model with them, with the state government as one party, NMCG as the government of India as one party, and Indian Oil as another party. So that model has worked, and then we are constructing it. We are also looking for similar models in different places. So, but the policies should be such that we must have a place for many more such innovations to come and these kind of things to happen. Again, institutional framework will be very important. How we link the national plus state level management and monitoring. Some of it you have already explained. So maybe at this stage, I will like to put some of these questions. And then we also have a water regulator, what role they can play. And then Maharashtra regulator is very much here. Many innovative things are happening, wastewater reuse certificate, credit. So I think we will have to ultimately develop a kind of good economic model. Technology is not a big issue, and especially in NMCG, we are actually going for a technology neutral kind of approach. So there is a lot of place for innovation, etc. I will like to stop at this stage. There are so many issues, and then I'm really happy that we have moved ahead. So many states have joined, so many policies have come. We have developed quite a lot of material, and issues are also much more clear now. But
thank you very much.
Answer for them.
Thank you, Mr. Mishra. And that's a perfect entrance into the next speaker, actually, Mr. Bakshi, who has been most recently chairman of the Maharashtra Water Resource Regulatory Authority, and it would be interesting now to get the perspectives from a state. So, Mr. Bakshi, please.
Thank you, Jeremy. I'll keep my talk very crisp, and I'll just give the points why I think that the wastewater reuse has not got the importance that it should have got in the country. First of all, there are problems with the wastewater. That is, first problem is that it's only being attended to in the urban sector. That is, the urban cities only are thinking about wastewater reuse. In the rural area, there is no scope for wastewater reuse, and there is also no technology for decentralized modular type of wastewater treatment plants which can handle very small quantities of water. The first problem in India is a problem of priority. Most of the urban administrators, they are having so many responsibilities to be discharged that wastewater treatment takes a very low priority. And as you know, many of the people who are attending this conference, they know Indian administration so well that a municipal commissioner who is in charge of the municipality, his priorities change every day. And it all depends on what the people want, what the public representatives want. And therefore, the priority of his subjects changes. And in that list of priorities, the wastewater treatment has a very low position. That is the first problem. The second problem is that unlike in Israel and Singapore does almost 100% of treatment and about 35% of reuse. Israel does about 90% of treatment and about 85% of reuse. Unlike that in Maharashtra, let's talk of Maharashtra because I know Maharashtra, I'm working here, I was working here. So in Maharashtra, there is a capacity buildup of only about 70%. So at best, we can treat 70%. But even that capacity is not getting fully utilized. The actual treatment is only to the extent of 30%. Therefore, there is a gap of 70% which is not getting achieved. The second problem is in the wastewater treatment is that the technology is still not expanded to such a level that it becomes very cheap. It's quite expensive. Even if you select from various kinds of technology, the technology which comes in is quite expensive for the urban administration to bear. The third problem is that the returns on wastewater are still not very attractive. In fact, they're very, very low. Therefore, even if you have to spend a lot of money bringing in the technology and doing the treatment of water, the returns that are going to the urban administrator or to the operator are not going to be very attractive, and we have to bring in some mechanism for making it better. The fourth prominent problem is that the cost of fresh water in India is very, very low, be it for the agriculture, be it for the domestic, and be it for the industries. In fact, in Maharashtra, we are happy that we are able to collect some charges from the agriculturists also. But in other states, North India, when they come to know that Maharashtra is charging the farmers also, they get surprised. They say, how are you charging the farmers? Are they paying you? Yes, they are paying us. But the amount of money that they pay is very, very low. I will put it as a ratio of 1 agriculture, 3 domestic use, and about 6 from the industry. So industries use very little water, but they pay much more. Now, what can we do to really address these issues? The most important action that we can take is, because of the COVID, there is a change in mindset. People are willing to accept the advice of the government. And in fact, many of the regulations, many of the orders of the government have been accepted without much of resistance. Therefore, I feel it in my opinion, this is the right time to push very, very severe regulations and policies. This is the right time. Wastewater reuse policy, which is getting drafted by the NMCG, I think if they bring in regulations and very strict regulations, then the priority will have to come up and people will have to attend to it. One of the actions which can be taken is, we thought in Maharashtra, and we are perhaps going to take it up. I'm not there, but the next authority will take it up. We wanted to notify no freshwater use zone around every STP. So depending on the capacity of the STP, a particular radius will be notified that there will be no fresh water use in this zone. And in case you want to use the fresh water, then you have to pay very high price for it. And in case you are using the treated water, then you pay a very, very concessional rate. This kind of mechanism is is going to make the wastewater use very, very attractive and increase the price of the fresh water all around and give treated water at a lesser cost. Last point before I close for the introductory remark is that we have to give infrastructure status to wastewater treatment plants. If we give the infrastructure status, then we will be in a position to collect money from the open market in terms of infrastructure tax-free bonds, which will actually cater to the requirement of the treatment plants, and a lot of money can come in and we can use it for the treatment plant at a much cheaper rate. I think I'll limit at this and then respond at the time of questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Bakshi. And already I can see from the chat coming through, there are some resonance in the questions coming through about the need to motivate decision makers to really support wastewater treatment, the concerns around where the financial support is going to come from, all these other issues. So it's let's now move to Birgit Vogel, and been working with GIZ, the German Development Assistance Organization, just to get your perspective on the importance of this new initiative.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jeremy, for giving me the floor. And I think we can already hear that, and we all agree that the reuse of treated wastewater is more relevant than ever, because water security really gained a lot, is essential, and therefore also the efficient use of water as a resource is actually crucial. In these 3 or 4 minutes, I would like to reflect a bit on the very issue in the European Union and of course also in India, but a bit, put it in a holistic and integrative way. So if we look at the European Union, the over extraction of water is really a major cause of water stress. And you might be surprised about these figures, that at least 11% of the EU population and 70% of the EU territory actually have been affected by water scarcity. So I'm not only talking, about water scarcity in the southern part of Europe, where countries and member states always struggle with scarcity. I'm also speaking about countries in the center of Europe, like France, Germany, and Austria, that are now facing these problems. So in the frame of, growing problem with water scarcity, of course, the reuse of treated wastewater gains in importance, and it is really identified as a potential way for addressing long-term imbalances between the water demand and the water supply. Jeremy showed us in his presentation that in the European Union, we use treated wastewater for irrigation, groundwater recharge, recreational purposes, but also the industries use it. If we look at the policies, you know that in Europe, the water policy is very much based on an integrated river basin management approach, and therefore the targeted reuse of treated wastewater is integral part of it, and looking very much at the impacts on water quantity, quality from agricultural irrigation. The EU policies, when it comes to the reuse, are very strict, but also very new, and they actually hold use-based treatment norms and look at the quality of the treated wastewater. Just to give an example, in many member states, there are 55 parameters that are monitored. If we look at using water for irrigation, treated wastewater, bacteria being looked at, nematodes, heavy metals, emerging substances, and hazardous substances. In India, the number of the parameters is still far lower, really looking at the regular or classic water quality standards of the discharge of treated wastewater, but also of water bodies where the wastewater is being discharged into. So if we look at the reuse of treated wastewater in such a way that it actually replaces the use of other freshwater sources, it can definitely contribute to improving water status. What I mean is, for example, if we use treated wastewater for irrigation, it will result in less abstraction of freshwater and groundwater, improve the water quantity and quantity, and also ensure environmental flows, and the ecosystem services can benefit from it. This was mentioned beforehand, of course, when we reuse treated wastewater, the infrastructure aspect is very important, that installations are managed and operated at a very high standard and meeting actually the permit conditions. This contributes to public confidence, and it will result in a more positive public perception towards treated wastewater reuse. This webinar is also about the post-COVID era, and I would shortly like to mention that it will be crucially important that we really look into this aspect and how this virus actually behaves in water. We don't really know too much about it, but it will be crucial that decision makers, businesses, local authorities, and relevant stakeholders create a joint platform and cooperate and build up partnerships in order to tackle this issue together. I think it's only possible in that way, and we need to come up with a future strategy. In the end, I would like to mention, of course, the India-EU Water Partnership again, and that we are tackling the issue of treated wastewater reuse together with the Ministry of Jal Shakti and the National Mission for Clean Ganga. And we will intensify our aims to actually exchange on innovative technologies that will be needed to eliminate the problems related to COVID-19 in the perspective of treated wastewater. So we will keep building partnerships between EU and Indian water companies, and we really are very confident that the India-EU Water Partnership can contribute to this topic and also investigate more on COVID-19 in relation to treated wastewater reuse. So,
thank you very much, Birgit, for those interesting perspectives. And just also because of this process for developing the policy, looking at the chat as Birgit was talking there, various people are also proposing ideas and experiences that we can be shared. So if you have any experiences or documents or things, or guidelines that you think we need to look at, please also attach those to the communications so those can be looked at afterwards. So now let's move on to business, and business is where the solutions are. So please start with you, Mr. Chopra Rajneesh, if you could just give a few words from the insights from VA Tech Vabeg. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeremy. So I would like to be as brief as possible in the interest of the time. See, I represent VA Tech Vabeg Limited, which is an Indian multinational which does water and wastewater management in almost 30 countries spread across 4 continents. We are also fortunate that we have been doing some work for Ganga also. And as far as wastewater is concerned, I think for last 1.5 decades, VATech Wabag has been a very, very vocal proponent that it should be termed as a resource. It cannot be termed as a, liability or just a, statutory requirement that I have to treat because there are CPCB guidelines, and today we mentioned about NGT that they are enforcing certain things. It has to be treated as a resource if we really want all these policies to be successful and implementable and sustainable. Now, it's as a VATech, we don't only just talk about it. We have implemented this thing in the southern part of the country, Chennai, where we have a wastewater treatment plant, which is in operation for 15 years. 100% electricity required to run that plant is generated from the gas, which is produced there. And for the last 9 years, or maybe 10 years, 16 MLD, 16 million liters per day of the treated wastewater is being supplied to a refinery, where we built a reclamation plant for them, which is reverse osmosis based. And with one desalination plant and one recycle plant, that refinery became water neutral. Similarly, recently we have, commissioned a plant which is 45 million liters per day, which is financed under the Amrut program of the government, and state government has been ensuring the implementation. So 100% of that water is being sold to a SEZ, which is called SIPCOT, at the rate of 80 rupees per kiloliter. And the payback for capital investment is going to be 4 to 5 years. Probably because of COVID, it might see this thing. So we believe that, if all the three resources are recovered, from the sludge, we can convert it to manure, as Jeremy also said in his opening remarks. If the water can be reused. But we believe that in the current scenario, the treated wastewater, the best customer is industries. And there are already policy initiatives to that. But maybe during the course of our discussion, I will talk about what are the challenges in even implementing it with the industries. So, but then definitely industry is a good customer today. And there are a lot of water scarce areas. I think a couple of years back, even in the parliament, report was tabled that what are the losses in billions of dollars because of shutting down of thermal power plants because of water scarcity. So it makes definitely a business case to implement that in especially the water scarce areas to begin with, and gradually it can be moved to other areas too. That's in short what I can say. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rajneesh. And as you say, where there's a meeting of minds, then things can happen. I think that's an interesting takeaway. So let's move on to Yatin, please. Yatin Tayalia from Suez.
Sure. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. And firstly, thanks a lot for giving us this opportunity. I think reuse is a very, very relevant topic in current context, and it's great to have this be part of this prestigious panel. Actually, for some of you may know that Suez is one of the largest environment services company, and we have had significant presence in India for last 40 years, and we have global experience of probably operating around 2,500 wastewater or reuse plants across the globe, right? We have been fortunate in India to do various diverse, wastewater recycle projects that Jeremy, you talked about as well, which are present in Europe, but we are seeing that in India as well. In fact, right now we are building one of the largest municipal sewage to industrial water reuse plant. It's more than 50 MLD at Kanpur, at Panki, where we already have the industrial off-taker, the power plant that policy Mr. Mishra talked about. Very interestingly, we also recently commissioned a very unique sewer mining project for one of our customers, Rashtriya Chemical Fertilizer in Mumbai. What sewer mining essentially is, tap the water from the sewer, which is just going close by. And essentially, we have been able to make this industry completely freshwater free. Right? Interestingly, both these projects are actually built using advanced technologies like membrane bioreactor and reverse osmosis. And besides this, we have also been fortunate to build probably more than 15 complete zero liquid discharge plants for some of the toughest industrial effluents. Again, one of the very important component of the policy initiatives that we talked about, right? What we are seeing in industry or across the country right now, the drivers are mainly two, I would say. What we are seeing is water scarcity and sustainability, and it's more being done at industrial level right now. I mean, within industry, they have been trying to get water neutral or reduce the freshwater demand. And for larger scale, really, you need facilitation or really enablement of municipal corporation or government bodies like Mr. Bakshi and Mr. Mishra talked about in terms of off-takers, expediting, all that off-take arrangement that has to be done. And then most of the recycle in otherwise in terms of 100% ZLD stuff is being driven by regulation. At this point, I would say the financial incentive is a bit less, as Mr. Bakshi mentioned, unless you're comparing with, say, cost of desalination, where definitely the cost of reuse is lower than desalination, but the expectation is the complete infrastructure around collection, conveyance, and distribution is available. But at this point, definitely, we are seeing various kind of reuse plants, be it industrial wastewater plants, urban wastewater. Interestingly, Mr. Bakshi mentioned that there is no technology right now available from decentralized standpoint. But within urban sector, we have been able to probably build more than 300 decentralized wastewater plants. And I don't see a reason why the same thing cannot be translated to rural. And in fact, I mean, the power consumption has come down so much that we could be actually operating this through even solar power as well, really to make it, independent from the power availability standpoint. I would say on the municipal wastewater side, or municipal wastewater to industrial side, I would say there's a good progress. We have seen few projects coming out, but again, a lot more is going to happen as the policy comes out. And again, a lot more, I would say, involvement of municipal corporation and government is required. In terms of indirect potable or direct potable reuse, like Mr. Bakshi talked about in Singapore and Israel, I think we're right now a bit far away from that. And I think what is really required is a lot of work needs to be done probably in terms of education and awareness before we actually get down to this indirect potable reuse or direct potable reuse, right? Quick comment on technology perspective. I would say, as Mr. Mishra also mentioned, that technology is really not a challenge at this point in time. Various kind of technologies, membrane bioreactors, ultrafiltration, reverse osmosis, nanofiltration, ozonation, which all allows you to do this reuse, I do believe, at a reasonable cost. Again, the cost comparison should not be what is the current water tariff. It is what the industry or the customers are really ready to pay. In fact, I would go to the extent of saying that the incremental cost of treating the water for discharge versus water for reuse is not a whole lot different. So if you're treating the water for discharge, we may as well include a little bit of additional cost and really do it for reuse purpose. And also, Mr. Rajneesh talked about a lot of other technologies like anaerobic digestion, using Class A solids, which actually can go as a manure or fertilizer. All those are available, which can actually make this reuse water, a lot more affordable, right? I would say, especially in post-COVID world, this has become very, very important topic because there's going to be focus on health and hygiene. And I think to drive this, really effort has to be at multiple front. I would say 4-pronged approach. Firstly, of course, promoting or creating awareness around this, what I call an education outreach initiative. Very interestingly, Mr. Bakshi talked about the water reuse certificate. You should be rewarding, recognizing this, and essentially helping industries adopt this. We should be removing the barriers, which could be regulatory barriers, technical barriers, and financial barriers, which right now are coming of water reuse. We got to incentivize reuse through tariff policies, grants, subsidies. And lastly, we should have the supporting regulations and mandates for water reuse. So I would stop at this point and then we'll take questions later on. Thank you.
Right, thanks very much, Yatin. And thank you all panelists for your first round of thoughts. So we've got about 10 minutes or so left. So I'm going to come around one more round and with some questions. If you could keep your comments down to a couple of minutes maximum, please, then we'll have a chance to also respond to many of the questions that are coming in through the chat session. So back to you, Mr. Mishra, if I may. I'm just going to look two aspects I'd like sort of a crisp response on, please. First of all, this issue of what is the benefit of a national policy when in fact water is a state subject? What added value can it bring? And secondly, if we bring us up to date with the COVID situation, can we make use of this? Is this crisis an opportunity for us to take this forward?
Okay. Thank you. I think you had also flagged the benefits of national policy, and we had some rethink about it because, as you had also mentioned, water is a state subject. But going through our experience of different states having different policies, and some of the government of India ministries are also bringing their own policy. So we thought based upon the implementation part, like what different states have done. So we thought that a kind of national policy will give a much bigger, much broader perspective. However, the policy has to be also flexible, giving a kind of flexibility to the states to suit their needs and then make some changes. But we also felt that certain states are taking lead and developing the policy, certain states are not doing it, though it will be much more required there also. So a kind of national policy will in a way give a kind of model, and it will also facilitate them to look at other states' policy, etc. and some of the examples. Some of the examples which some of our co-panelists from industry told. So I think it's better to bring those things at a kind of national platform, and it will also show a kind of priority, because Mr. Baxi very rightly said that it has to be priority. So if at national level, the topmost level people talk about it, and the priority automatically comes. So I think these things were very much important. We also, and then coming to your second point about COVID, this is a very different kind of scenario now. People are at this point of time perhaps much more sensitive about hygiene, sanitation, their own personal hygiene, and also overall environmental improvement or environmental situation around them. There is a lot of importance of water sector which has been felt now, because if you look at a municipal place, then the health, water, we all understand the linkage, and a kind of setting has come where perhaps due to the crisis, people are much more concerned to know about what's being done and then what they can do. Maybe due to restrictions imposed due to lockdown and all that, certain change in behavior has happened for their own sake. So this is a good opportunity for us to look at a strategy, how it can be sustained, how it can be communicated to them, and then this is the time if we come up with certain tools quickly, perhaps the chance of compliance, chance of acceptance will be much higher at this point of time. So like some of the reuse things, some of the things where perhaps we can prohibit certain fresh water use for certain purpose, maybe non-food crop or some industrial use. I think some of these things will not be very easily acceptable, but perhaps this is the time we can leverage this kind of situation to really drive home some of the policies and explain to them that it's in the overall interest of the people, overall interest of the state to really use them.
Great, thanks very much, Mr. Mishra. And back to you, Mr. Bakshi. You talked about some of the issues in really scaling up this initiative, and I just wanted to sort of pick up on a few. I mean, from a regulatory experience, obviously pricing is one issue that you have to get right. There was a concern on the chat that somebody was saying that the motivation of local officials to take this forward isn't very high at the moment. And how do you sort of do that? Do you make it a KPI in their personal performance? Was one suggestion. What do you see as the most critical thing to scale up treated wastewater reuse? Maybe you need to unmute your microphone. Yeah, Mr. Bakshi, just to unmute your microphone. Thank you.
Audible now?
Yeah.
KPI is a good suggestion, but more than KPI, I would suggest that the national policy which is getting drafted by the NMCG, if they provide for giving powers to the local authorities for notifying no freshwater use zone, then it becomes very effective, because in that once you notify that area that these are the survey numbers, or these are the villages, or these are the areas where fresh water will not be given to you as normal. In case you do want to take the fresh water, then you have to pay 10 times the normal freshwater cost. In other words, since you are located close to the STP and that area, your first right on the treated water is there. We recognize that, and we do give you at a very cheap price. And for the agriculture sector, this water is going to be very, very useful. I have, in my interactions with the farmers, I've gathered that the farmers are very happy if you give them this supply, because of two reasons. It has nutrients, and secondly, it is assured supply. It does not depend on rains. So it is an assured supply from the STP or the sewage treatment plant. And therefore, the farmer is very happy. In fact, in one of the villages near Aurangabad, farmers have come together to tell us that we will lay the distribution system from your STP to our farms. You don't have to spend. You only assure us the water and don't charge us for the water. We will lay down the distribution system. This is the extent of readiness. And therefore, as I said, during the time of COVID, there is a mindset in the country to accept tough regulations. Very tough actions have been accepted and not much of resistance has been shown. So if the NMCG takes that point, I'll request Mr. Mishra that in case he can provide for he can make a provision that all local bodies will have the right to notify no freshwater use zone. Once it is notified, then the Water Resources Department cannot give fresh water without the permission of the local authority. Of course, the local authority will have to think whether they are in a position to supply or not, whether their STP is functioning or not. In case their STP is not functioning to the fullest capacity, they can de-notify for some time, right? So notification is one of the solutions. Then the second thing is that, as I said, that the national policy should think of giving infrastructure status to the treatment plants and the infrastructure investment. And therefore, once you do that, then the income tax department can be approached by the respective big corporations like Mumbai, Nashik, Pune, and they can raise infrastructure tax-free bonds. Raising tax-free bonds or raising infrastructure bonds or raising municipal bonds has not been, it's not unheard of. Municipal corporations from Nashik, Ahmedabad, they have raised municipal bonds, but they are not infrastructure tax-free bonds. They are just bonds. Therefore, infrastructure tax-free bonds, if they are raised, then you have ample money with the corporation or the urban local bodies to spend in the infrastructure. Third is that we should be mentally prepared to provide viability gap funding for all these projects. Initially, any trader, any business, any big house, they lower the price of the product to make it popular. Once the product is accepted and people start using it, then gradually the price is risen because there is more demand. So that is the strategy for going into the market and creating a market for treated water by the industries, by the farmers, and also by the non-potable users. These are
Thank
the
you very much. Thank you, Mr. Bakshi. It's very interesting. I like the way you structure those points. And again, some people were talking about it on the chat as you were speaking about this no freshwater zone. So there's already interest in that, I can see. Back to you, Rajneesh. How do you see the business environment now in terms of this area for wastewater reuse, and to what extent has that been affected by COVID-19, positively or negatively? How do you see that going forward?
See, Jeremy, as far as municipal wastewater is concerned, I think during this phase we have seen, there is almost a gap in, the new tenders coming up. However, as even the representatives from the government also mentioned that given the current COVID scenario, water, which is a prerequisite for water and sanitation, actually it is the least talked about subject globally. When it comes to COVID, we are all talking about sanitizers, we are talking about masks, but nobody's talking about nothing will work without water. And we have statistics that all our water treatment plants which we run, they were run at full capacity. These plants will even supply water to commercial establishments, they will supply water to industries, but still they were run at full capacity. So that means there's a huge spike in demand as far as domestic user is concerned. Number two, what Mr. Bakshi also mentioned, that there has to be a right value to this water, because if that recovery of OPEX as per the national policy is not recovered, then it becomes in the longer period, non-bankable even with the multilaterals. Third is the point which we mentioned is that I think Mr. Mishra is there. He is the best person to talk about it. I think a lot of states, even during this COVID phase like this, I had digital meetings at a very senior level with the government in various states in the country, where they have shown interest in the model which National Mission for Clean Ganga has implemented, which is hybrid annuity. The question is, how do you secure the concessionaire? So maybe I'll take the advantage of this platform and request Mr. Mishra that since there are a lot of other rivers also under his purview now, and he is, even drafting the policy, probably if the same model can be extended, this can be implemented much faster. Because I know 4 years back, people were only saying that Ganga, nothing will happen. But today we see on the ground level, so much has happened. So probably, given his passion for this thing, what we observed during our, implementation of project.
Okay, I think we've lost Rajneesh for a second there. So he's put Mr. Mishra on the spot. But I'd just like to park that for one moment, please, and come back to Yatin first. Yatin, just some of the experiences you've had through this COVID experience, in sort of keeping your businesses going, the business continuity plan. But very interesting too. You were talking earlier about before the meeting around using health monitoring from sewage and sludge systems, and what sort of potential does that have as a monitoring tool to see where the hotspots of COVID are?
Sure. So firstly, Jeremy, on just our experience, we have been fortunate that we had global presence, and I would say we are definitely much better prepared because, of course, it started in some other parts of the world, started in China, went to Europe, right? And because we had presence everywhere, there were several lessons that we had already learned out there, the best practices which were available, and that really helped us keeping the services ongoing because we were doing services at Lucknow, Coimbatore, and of course various industrial wastewater plants as well across. So we were able to continue those services, continue to offer the services. Of course, we had to make sure that our employee safety is continuously being ensured. Of course, all those standard procedures were put in place. And the key thing that I would like to highlight, and which this COVID has brought in as well, is how do you leverage digital technologies during these times? And we have been able to use remote monitoring, diagnostics, and a lot of this stuff, which actually going forward is going to help us, run these plants, I would say, in more efficient way, and of course manage this crisis much better, right? Now, coming to how we can use this wastewater as a health monitoring, I think it's a very, very interesting topic. I would really like to term it as a waste to health initiative, if I could tell it, right? But I think you have seen, and there are a lot of now news items around that you are seeing presence of coronavirus in sewage, right? In fact, our group has developed a concept called COVID-19 City Sentinel. It's like a digital tool to monitor and quantify the presence of this coronavirus in wastewater, right? And you could really, utilize this to figure out where the hotspots are, depending on what the concentration of this coronavirus as well is. In fact, we have done extensive tests in some of the cities, not in India at this point in time, but in Europe. And we could clearly see that when actually it was picking up, the concentration of this virus in sewage was going up. And when it started getting better, we could actually see the coronavirus concentration actually started coming down. So you could see a very, very perfect trend out there. We have seen that in sewage, in input sewage, we have seen that in sludge as well. Interestingly, we actually seen this in secondary treated effluent as well. We have not seen that in a tertiary treated effluent, and that also tells us the importance of having tertiary treatment, even if it's for discharge purpose. We should be making sure that we are doing the tertiary treatment and not just leaving it at the secondary treated stage. So I think it's a very, very interesting topic. And again, you can always customize it for a specific region depending on the potential of specific disease. But I'm sure it can be really used as a very effective tool to monitor the health of the city and take some proactive actions.
Excellent. That's really encouraging. Thanks, Yatin, and thanks to everyone. I'm just going to go quickly to Birgit for one just very quick wrap up, sort of before we go back to the overall Q&A session. What's your sort of takeaway from some of the things you've heard in the last half an hour or so, Birgit?
Yeah, I mean, there are actually a lot of takeaways, of course, in general, and also in relation to the work that we are doing with NMCG on the national policy. And I'm sure Judith will summarize the key points. But what I found really interesting was the point of the awareness raising, which I think is really critical to make the public and the stakeholders aware of what is treated wastewater, what does it mean in relation to COVID-19, and how can this be safe. So I think all end users need to be aware of this, and Mr. Mishra said it clearly, and this is what I found very interesting, that the crisis actually makes people more concerned, but it also makes them more aware. So I really think this is something to make use of this moment and initiate this awareness raising, also in the process of drafting the national policies. And of course, what also flagged out to me was giving flexibility to the states, so that the national policy should guide the states to actually develop their state policies, but they should also, of course, go in a similar direction, that the coordination and the overall management on the national level will be easier. And what I also find very interesting, and Jeremy, you said this has been anyway raised with the questions from people and experts joining this meeting, is what Mr. Bakshi said, the no freshwater use zones, also seeing it from the cost point of view, but of course also seeing it from the safety and health point of view. So I think this is something to be further discussed. And then of course as well, how will the COVID aspect be reflected in the national policy in relation to this safety aspect?
Right. Very good. Thank you, Birgit, for those views, and thank you all panelists very much for this rich and insightful discussion, which has actually opened up, of course, another set of avenue for discussion in the policy and things as we move forward. And we'll be knocking at your doors, I'm sure, to get more insights from you. So I'm going to hand over back to Santosh now, but I'm afraid you're still on the hook a little bit, because there are some questions coming in from the participants through the chat system. So over to you, Santosh, and thank you very much, panelists, for your interventions today.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. I'd like to invite Vikrant to the panel discussion so that he can conduct the question and answer for us.
Hello. Santosh, you can hear me?
Yes, Vikrant, you're live.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Means majority of questions are obviously to Director General, National Mission for Clean Ganga. So, sir, I'm starting with you. The first question is from Mr. Dodit Khanna, and he's from Swiss, India. And the question is like,
can you be a little louder, please?
Okay. Sir, am I audible now?
Yes.
Yeah. So, sir, the question is like, under Namami Gange, NMCG is implementing a lot of sewage treatment plants, and now working for a national policy also to promote the reuse of treated wastewater, and means how society will going to be benefited by this. This is like the first question.
I think certainly it will be benefiting the society, as you yourself said, and this becomes even more relevant now because the demand for cleaner environment is going to further pick up after COVID, and not only reuse, in fact the treated wastewater is going to be important. So we started in Ganga Mission with less than 1/3 of the wastewater getting treated. We have raised it almost to the level of 55–60%, and many projects are going on along with this policy. And this is where perhaps I will also take what Rajneesh was asking me. We brought a lot of private partnership framework also while doing all these STP projects. And for the first time, we have a system where actually we are going to pay for the performance and not only for the construction, because the private investor is going to invest and he gets payment over 15-year annuity, and only when the performance will be good, he will get it. And I'm really very happy to tell you that, and Mr. Rajneesh was telling that many states are also showing interest. We initiated this process in NMCG, and now NITI Aayog actually is working, and they are recommending similar hybridity kind of approach where the concessionaire is also secured. His risk is taken care of so that we get good response. So I think all these things are basically going to take care of the long-term need of improving treatment capacity, and also not only just improving, running it with good performance. And ultimately that's going to really benefit the society, because we have to learn to treat our waste, to clean our waste. We have to come out of that mindset where we simply throw our either solid waste or sewage into nearest water body and forget about it. That regime, that mindset has to change, and through different methods what we are doing, perhaps we are going to see that change in future.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. The second question is from a young researcher from IIT Roorkee, and I would like that Mr. Bakshi from Maharashtra Water Resources Regulatory Authority to answer this thing. So Kirti Goyal is saying that Maharashtra already have like a lot of experience in Maharashtra already have a lot of experience in reuse of treated wastewater. So, and there were always like a public perception, a negative public perception is there toward reuse of treated wastewater. So how you tackle that problem, and what were the challenges you faced and how you overcome those? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very good question. Firstly, as I said, in Maharashtra, the treatment capacity is 70%, and actual treatment which is taking place is only to the extent of 35%. So about 35% capacity is there, but it is not getting operated. It is not getting operated because of 2-3 reasons. One, there is no manpower, or if there is a manpower, it is not trained, or there are too much of electricity charges that have to be paid by the urban local bodies. And last is the low priority and not a pressing issue, and therefore the treatment is not taking place. Now, acceptance of treated water by the users is one of very important questions. As far as agriculture is concerned, acceptance is gradually coming. Initially, there was a lot of resistance because of foul smell of the water, and labor did not want to work. But now that it is getting accepted by the farmer because of nutrients and because of the constant supply at the required frequency, required volume is given, and therefore it is getting accepted. And second is by the industries, they are now gradually coming in to say that the urban administration should treat only up to certain level. Beyond that, I will take the water to my premises. I'll do further treatment to suit my industry, to suit my requirement. So that kind of arrangement is working very well. So gradually, use of treated water is picking up. Initially, the thermal power plants in Nagpur, Nashik, and other places, they have started taking quite a lot. Gradually, it is shifting to the agriculture also, and some of the cities like Nashik, which grow a lot of grapes and a lot of horticulture crops, there also the demand for treated water is coming. So acceptability is coming. We have not discussed, and we are not going to discuss the use of treated water for potable purposes, just like in Singapore, because that is a target which is far ahead. There are psychological problems, so we cannot aim at that.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. And I totally agree that we have to go step by step, and we have to more focus on the non-potable uses of the treated wastewater. So I'm moving with the next question, and my next question is to Mr. Jeremy Bird. Mr. Uday Kelkar from NJSEI is asking that there are certain policies which are already existing, which promote the reuse of certain waste material, and he's citing to one of the policy developed by CPHO previously. So his question is like how we foresee to integrate the existing policy into the national policy which we are currently working on.
Yeah, thanks Uday for that question. Yeah, I think it's absolutely central to this policy that, as you saw in that schematic diagram I presented, that there are many interfaces, not only with other policies and programs, but of course with other institutions and agencies. And so it's critical that you have this sort of sort of core set of issues that this policy is going to address. Some of them I mentioned about mandatory use, about tariffs, about different business models, etc., technology, regulation, compliance, and then a series of other things which are outside the scope of this policy and which are within the mandate of other agencies and other policies. And bringing that coherence together is going to be something which is very important. And I think we're fortunate at the moment because there are the redrafting of a number of initiatives like the new National Water Policy, Urban Sanitation Policy, the initiative on zero liquid discharge, which we've been discussing with recently as well, where we can actually make sure that there is coherence and consistency across these. And then that then feeds back into how some of the financing programs at national level can assist down to local level. I mean, the work on standards is very important. And you mentioned CPHO. And here, I think, if we look at the experience from Europe, you see much more well-defined standards on a much broader set of parameters than you currently have in India. But you have a different economic situation. And so that gradual sort of catch up and how do we address some of those issues around raising the bar for standards while not compromising the ability to take up this massive opportunity for treated wastewater is a very fine balance. And I think I was very encouraged by what Yatin and Rajneesh were saying about how, with the right designs and the right business models and the right financing packages, these things can be made to work. It's around commitment and it's around the dedication towards making it work. So, yeah, I think certainly huge potential ahead. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Bird. And as you rightly said, what is being proposed by Mr. Yatin and Mr. Chopra. So my next question is for Mr. Chopra.
Yeah.
There are many participants, those who are asking that how you foresee the replication of your Chennai model to use the treated wastewater to the other big metros in India. And currently you are associated with Namami Gange also. So how you look forward for this replication and what are the challenges do you think you will going to have and how you will going to overcome them?
Thank you. See, as far as replication of the model is concerned, I think just for the benefit of viewers, as I said that we recently commissioned a 45 million liters per day. I think within a span of 3 months, the local Chennai Water Board, they've already awarded us an extension of by 25% of the capacity enhancement to 60 million liters per day. Now, definitely the realization of the price of this water is good in Chennai because Chennai is a water scarce area. And industries, they value it as a commodity. So if they have a production loss, they can't afford that. So my suggestion will be that it is very much replicable that if it is implemented in water scarce areas, even as per national policy guidelines, if tomorrow, even if the states are guided, which are the areas which are water scarce and where industries and thermal power plants are there, probably it will be, catch up much faster. Also, I got locked out in between. What I wanted to suggest is that there has to be some terminology for this treated wastewater. Our Chennai Metro Water Board, they termed it as true water, treated reuse water. I think so. Similarly, at a national level, like New Water of Singapore, if something like true water can be incorporated, the acceptance can be done. And definitely there has to be a public outreach program. So again, I will point out at Mr. Mishra, because probably in my 30 years of career in the water sector, I have never seen a public outreach program like Namami Gange. So probably, they can even advise the states on how to get that kind of awareness to make it replicable. But for sure, industries value this as a commodity. If there is a municipal industrial partnership, it is definitely a business model even today. The payback could be vary if the water tariff is low. In Chennai, if it is 3.5 years, elsewhere it could be 7 years. And the life cycle of the plant is 25 years. So it becomes a profitable proposition for the municipal body. or the concessionaire. So it is very much doable. That's all I can say today.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think it is well justified what you have said. So moving ahead, my next question is to Mr. Yatin. There are a number of participants, those who are saying that during the lockdown phase and post-lockdown, Government of India is focusing on now Atmanirbhar Bharat. So under this project of means or this promotion of Atmanirbhar Bharat, how you foresee the role of SMEs in uh, businesses managing the decentralized treatment of wastewater and then further reusing it for various purposes, their
So,
capacities, and what is your opinion on that?
yeah. So Vikrant, I would look at from two aspects. One from Atmanirbhar Bharat standpoint. I think we talked about various technologies right now, which can be really a solution to overall water problem, including reuse. Right, we got to look at how much of these technologies actually we are quote unquote Atmanirbhar as well. How much of them are actually localized. I think there's a big opportunity over here. In fact, I would say Suez, one of the first companies, probably 10 years back, when we started the first membrane rolling plant in India, and we have been able to, roll reverse fast here. Likewise, definitely there needs to be focus on improving the local content on these technology projects. In fact, I'm actually glad to say that most of the projects that we are doing in the country, more than 80% of that is actually local content, which essentially says that we are there we are kind of self-dependent or independent per se in that regard. With regard to opportunities for running these plants in a decentralized manner, I think this is a fantastic opportunity, especially as part of Jal Jeevan Mission, where there are going to be several either water treatment or wastewater treatment projects across. And we really need those regional entrepreneurs who can actually take ownership of these plants, build a good kind of a business model around it, and make sure that they are actually able to serve this for a longer period of time. Because one of the biggest challenges that we see on the decentralized water or wastewater treatment is ensuring their performance and the capability over duration of the period or the longer duration. Typically they kind of stop working because no one is taking care of in terms of maintenance, and they stop working in 2 to 3 year duration. So it's a big opportunity from that standpoint as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. Moving ahead with the next question. So next question is to you, Ms. Birgit. Means we have Ms. Amila from RPS Group in Ireland. And Amila is asking like, which are the various sectors in Europe where treated wastewater is being predominantly used, and whether industries are using the treated wastewater or not.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. I think it's also one of the slides to refer to that Jeremy showed, that, it's of course the reuse of treated wastewater is critically important in the water scarce countries for agricultural irrigation. Then, of course, it's industries on a voluntary basis, and of course also within the municipal area for recreational purposes, for groundwater recharge, and so on and so on. So the list is long, and I think to get a more precise answer on this, you could also take a look into our comparative assessment that we did under the India EU water project, and have a look in there on those uses, and as well refer to Jeremy's presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Birgit. So we will be sharing this comparative assessment with all the departments also. So moving ahead with the question, my next question to you is Mr. Mishra from NMCG. There are a few young scholars and from various universities, and they are asking like why international cooperation is needed to develop the policies regarding the related to the water sector in India. Why we need international cooperation in this regard?
Good, interesting question. Let me tell. See, these areas are, if you would have seen, the presentation of Mr. Jeremy Bird, where he actually told you about the complexity of the policy making. And we feel that the partners are needed not only for this policy making, but for a challenging task like river rejuvenation or basin rejuvenation. You have to learn from experiences of different partners, whether national or international. You would be very happy to know that we have several national level apex institutions, like most of the IITs, IIT Kanpur, IIT Roorkee, and several other institutions working with us on these issues. But as a part of, this is one of the priority area in India-EU water partnership. And then they have certain experience of basin management and looking at these kind of challenges in a bigger way. So if you look at this entire process, there are several national level experts and stakeholders which they are also consulting. If you look at their presentation, actually they enumerated most of our programs and policies which are existing in the country. So it's not like that we do not have expertise and we have to look for someone else to come and guide. Rather, it's better to learn from each other and learn from certain best practices. In somewhere else, today only I was saying that European rivers are different from Indian rivers. We have some difference in uses of the river practices, but we can learn about some of those practices and intelligently adapt them, not just simply copy them, rather look at our own circumstances, our own challenges, and find our own solution. But a framework which is little impartially done, objectively done, always help. And in this team, there are several national apex institutions and several researchers who are part of this whole team. And it's not that someone else is coming and handing over a prescription and then it's not being done collaboratively. So it's a good example of collaboration. Ganga is such a subject where we have got collaborators from all over country as well as all over world. Several countries have expressed their interest in joining us, helping us, and we will also be very happy. Several countries are also interested in learning from us. So we have both kind of cooperation, both kind of international cooperation, where a mighty river like Ganga, if we are reaching some success and some results, so there are several people who are also learning, and it's a kind of cross-learning exercise. It's not just one-way learning which takes place in such kind of collaboration, and we are very happy. You will be, I mean, just one example I can give you. Recently, we had a Ganga Quest quiz competition for mostly for students, and not only Ganga Basin states. In fact, people from each and every state and union territory, and also from outside country, some international people also participated in a quiz on Ganga. So I think the interest in this river, interest in the subject is overwhelming, and then we must take everyone together and pick up something which is most relevant and useful for us.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. So my next question is to Mrs. Judith. We have Mr. Tyagi from Central Pollution Control Board, and he's asking like how ULBs in Europe became so economically self-sufficient in managing their wastewater, and what were the various mechanisms or processes which they applied to get this status.
Is the question to me?
To Mrs. Judith. Judith, you can hear me?
Because Judith is not on the screen.
Okay, so Judith, should I repeat the question?
Yes, sorry.
So we have a participant from Central Pollution Control Board, and he's asking like ULBs in Europe are self-sufficient in managing their waste and wastewater, economically self-sufficient. So what are the waste mechanisms which they have installed to get this status, and how we can learn?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think it's, of course, not a simple question to answer. We've heard earlier also from Birgit that within Europe you have different kinds of countries, a complexity of geographies, of government systems, and then at municipal level it's equally diverse. So it's probably a bit difficult to tell. And it's the advice that I would give is really to look into very concrete examples. There are various best practices that could be looked at that give you an idea of what are the key mechanisms that can assure that. So I believe we're happy to share such information later on if there is interest, and then we can share it via email.
Yeah, I think that is enough. And thank you so much, Judith. So, sir, I'm ending the question and answer session. And the last question is to you, Mr. Mishra from NMCG. Like whether the policy under formulation considered or will focus on the issues like pharmaceutical waste and the microplastic in the wastewater before it is being forwarded for reuse. It is being asked by Hardeep Rai Sharma, who is an associate professor in Kurukshetra University.
Thank you. I think that there would be a discussion on water quality standards for reuse, and when we get into that, different aspects and different options, different kinds of sources of pollution, or all these things will be discussed technically. Already earlier also it came, we already have several standards for these things existing in the country. So certainly we will be looking at the national standards, and wherever required, some of the international standards dealing with the reuse standard for those kind of things will also be looked into. So the team would be looking into various aspects and various standards required for different kinds of either it's microplastics or pharmaceutical waste, etc. In fact, recently only a team is working under CPCB, in which our people are also partner, to look at some of these waste which is being generated in COVID, because masks, so many other things are also coming up. So the pollution to the water bodies because of these things. So already there is a technical team at the national level looking at these, developing guidelines for these kind of things. So certainly these standards would be looked at.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. Now I am handing over to Mr. Santosh.
Thank you, Vikrant.
Yeah.
Before we go to Judith for the vote of thanks, I'd like Katrina to thank all the speakers, the audience present here on behalf of IFAT India.
Sorry, I just have to start my video again. Yeah, okay. Yeah, from my side, a very warm thank you to all of the speakers. I think it was a very fruitful and also very interesting discussion on, I would say, one of the most burning topics we are facing currently in the pandemic situation. And when I look at the participants, we could really see that many joined, many stayed, and this really makes it very clear that we really hit the topic. So in this case, I really would like to say a big thank you to all of you, to Birgit, to Jeremy, to Yatin, to Rajiv, to Vikrant, also now for guiding the questions, to Mr. Bakshi, to Rajat, to Mr. Chopra, and to all the other ones, to Mr. Ranjan. And now, Judith, I would like to hand over to you as you offered to make a short summary. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Katarina. So my name is Judith Wein.